the first of these two quotes I want to read you is from AOC answering a question about the 2016 election, about Trump winning in 2016. Yeah. And here's what she said then. Social instability is a direct result of wealth inequality, and bigotry is largely a result of poverty and scarcity. I know this may be hard to believe, but take refuge in the fact that sexism, racism, and xenophobia did not win last night. She's talking about Trump's victory in 2016. Yeah. There were attendance to a larger stage. What won was the, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So she's making this like very traditional leftist point about bigotry and demagoguery ultimately being a result of sort of misdirected anger about wealth inequality.
Yeah, this is traditional, yeah.
Sure. Okay. Now, the second quote is from AOC talking about the Trump vote. I mean, obviously he lost the election, but like the large vote for Trump in 2020, right? So this is 4 years later, and she says, but we know that race is a problem, and avoiding it is not going to solve any electoral issues. We have to actively disarm the potent influence of racism at the polls. And the interviewer asked her, is there anything from Tuesday that surprised you? And she says, the share of white support for Trump. I thought the polling was off, but just seeing it, there was the feeling of realizing what work we have to do. We need to do a lot of anti-racist deep canvassing in this country, because if we just keep losing white shares and just allowing Facebook to radicalize more and more elements of white voters in the white electorate, et cetera. And all I could think reading all this is that this seems like a disturbing to me regression in her politics. That like in the first quote, look, you can say the first quote is a little bit of an oversimplification of what happened, and there's some legitimate criticisms you could make, but I think the politics of it are so much more useful, right? Because it's staying focused on economic inequality that affects the majority of people, and that they're sort of good socialist solutions to. And the second one is all about how people are just voting for Trump because they're too racist, and we need to just somehow or another make work on the racism in their heads, like in other words, like the first quote suggests that the solution is to appeal to the economic interests of a majority of people, and the second quote suggests that the problem is just that like people have too many problematic thoughts in their heads, and you need to fix that first. And that does seem like a big shift in her politics, and it does seem like one, from my perspective at least, in the wrong direction.
I totally agree with you, and it's also a strangely naive view. It's the old liberal democratic view that sorry, before I get confused, the tragedy is this. It's even maybe more tragic than you think, that if we were to ask her, AOC, directly, she probably wouldn't have even seen the contradiction. Mm-hmm. For her, it would simply be, yes, white people are economically poor, white, frustrated, racism is giving them an easy way out, and so on. So, okay, let's work on them, let's reconvince them, and so on and so on. I think, I totally agree with you that, sorry, I will now speak in the worst Lacanian jargon, but that she passes from this, I agree with you, simplified, but nonetheless, fundamental Marxist insight, which I think doesn't mean that you put racism into secondary role. As my friend Fred Jensen developed it nicely, you cannot talk about class struggle today in the United States without mentioning at least anti-black racism. And it's not this superficial racism of how you treat blacks. Afro-pessimists see this very well. It's a much deeper, ground-level racism practiced even by well-meaning liberals in the very way they treat blacks even if they are friendly, they are patronizingly friendly, and so on and so on. So, but then in the second part, he changes into, sorry for this jargon, a totally different discourse. He almost speaks as an electoral campaign organizer. You know, we have a problem here, we should put more effort in this, and so on and so on. And it's not so much that I want to brutally oppose focus on class struggle and convincing people about that racism and so on and so on. But racism itself is a much more serious thing, which you cannot simply do it by, and that's what worries me in her case. It's simply we need better propaganda. And this is an old democratic problem. It started with Reagan, where this big shock, how comes that even poor white people or even some blacks and so on that we are losing them, that they are going to Republicans, and even, I forgot his name, some well-known semiotic linguists even followed this line, even, sorry, I forgot, getting old and senile. One of them brought a proposal to the Democratic Party.
Wait a second. Are you talking about, was it George Lakoff and
sorry. Yeah, you know, this naive idea, the problem will be solved if you follow my proposal on how to better do the propaganda and so on and so on. Now, as nonetheless a psychoanalyst, I would say that there is so much more argument than just argumentation and so on in racism. Racism is not something that you can directly fight through argumentation. Arguments are very ambiguous thing here, because as a psychoanalyst again, I would immediately add the point of enjoyment. At everyday level, racism is about stealing. Others want to steal our enjoyment. You call it these days our way of life, others as a threat, or the others enjoy in perverted ways, and so on and so on. There is no racism without enjoyment. By enjoyment, I don't mean sexual enjoyment. I mean this deep satisfaction brought about by racist and sexual fantasies and racist and sexual ritualistic practices and so on and so on. And if you combine this with, of course, economic interests and so on, you get something which is much harder to do than through mere electoral rhetoric. We have to move to this level, because my friend Adrian Johnston, otherwise Hegelian Lacanian philosopher, pointed out nicely in what strange situation we are today. So often, I will not get lost, but this is my old motive. It's not even any longer the fetishist disavowal, in the sense of je sais bien mais quand même, I know very well, but. It's a kind of a knowledge, I quote Alenka Sopantis here, knowledge itself becomes a fetish. Let's, where you include into being racist or sexist, a reflexive awareness of what you are doing. Let's say I'm doing something which is clearly triggered by some repressed mechanisms, and then you attack me for it. And then my answer is simply, yes, I know what I am doing. I know I'm not doing what I should have done. I know. And this knowing it serves as something that enables you nonetheless to do it. I think there is a weird mechanism here of how directly against the early Marxist and Freudian presuppositions, knowledge, we have to return to these old distinctions, Freudian and Marxist, between abstract knowledge. Knowing something doesn't in itself mean liberation. Knowing something can also serve as justifying the way what you were doing before. Just you can say, no, you're not telling me anything new. I know it. And then you go on knowing it, you know. The same problem was already detected by Freud relatively quickly, because the early Freud's idea was, I have a symptom. When you explain the meaning of the symptom to me, symptom will disappear. Then Freud noticed it doesn't work like that. You rationally accept the meaning of the system, but the symptom persists simply, you know. So I'm not becoming here an irrationalist in the sense of deep mystical psychic pain. I'm just saying there are different types of knowledge. There is knowledge where you know something very well, but it doesn't engage you personally in the sense of acting upon it. And that's, I think, the big problem today, even with ecology and so on and so on. We obviously all know it. You know, there will be global warming, blah, blah, blah. But in some paradoxical sense, knowing it enables us to go on like before, because then you criticize me and say, yeah, I know it, and so on and so on. It's a situation which is very worrying, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that in the case of racism and and Trump voters, which to be absolutely clear, like of course, of course, Trump was appealing to racism quite a bit, in the.
Yeah, but at the same time, he mixed knowledge. Did you know somebody else sent me a comment, a liberal standard comment, but it in a very naive way, mostly through quotes. I forgot the guy's name. Sorry. He pointed out very nicely how, if you translate Trump into his basic, not rational, but whatever argument, racism and so on, you lose his attraction. And his attraction was not just in masking it, but in playing a joker, making fun of himself, dirty jokes, that Trump's disgusting humor is not secondary to his success. It's part of it. So you cannot say that his obscenities, dirty humor is just a secondary mask. No, it is here as a crucial moment, which also in some sense demobilizes possible critique, because Trump goes pretty far here. Like he says something as a joke which is racist, and then a couple of times, you remember, he did it. Then when he was attacked for racism, he said, "But don't you see, I was joking, blah, blah, blah," and so on. He was totally sleazy here, Trump. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that this direct appeal to real interest works, because the paradox of our libidinal economy desire is that we are ready to swallow quite a lot to get libidinal perverted satisfaction, even if it goes clearly and we are aware of it against our interest. Isn't an old leftist thesis that the triumph of ideology is that this famous lower classes, whatever, by voting Trump, they are systematically voting against their interests. At the end, they are the big losers of the transformation of the last decade and so on. And the paradox is that you even cannot say that they are not aware of it. It's at a different level. So here I would complicate things. But can I go to another point so that we don't run out of time?
No, I just wanted to say, just to wrap up the other point, that I think that and I mean, I think the point about ideology and self-interest is probably too interesting to get into now, because it'd be too long a discussion. But I think that I do think I do wonder if we often overestimate the role of ideology as opposed to people just making like short-term rational decisions about like how they have no particular reason to think that more radical change is possible, and so because of it's a collective action problem, and so it's all kind of like whatever, the prisoners in the prisoner's dilemma, right? They're not being irrational. It just ends up going against their self-interest. But as I said, that'd be a much longer discussion.
Again, sorry, allow me, very short. I agree with you. The only thing, and I hope we agree here, I would like to add is that this is not just a psychological phenomenon, but this short-term reasoning is in itself a signal of a certain global ideological situation where people simply no longer believe or take seriously any big cause you think in short terms. This short-term thinking is itself part of the situation. It's not just a psychological failure or whatever, and so on and so on. But what really, now I will conclude with an anecdote which it's embarrassing to me.
Okay.
I mean,
sorry. Before we get the anecdote, Slavoj, can I just say I wanted to, on the point about the Trump voters, all I was going to say is that I think the problem with with focusing on the bigotry is not that it's not there. It's that what that feels like, saying like that AOC quote, the anti-racist deep canvassing, that like what that feels like is, I think from the perspective of the voters you're trying to reach out to, is just kind of a moral attack, that you're telling them that they're bad people, and even if they can see your point or whatever, like they're just not going to be very receptive to that. Whereas if you appeal, if you make the economic appeal, which don't get me wrong, it's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to work for tons of people, but but if you make that, I think that has a much better chance of being packaged together with better, racial attitudes, because instead of just like morally attacking somebody, you're presenting, just a more appealing vision of what politics should be about. And that just seems like it's going to be much more likely to entice whoever's capable of being enticed. I
totally agree with you here, and I give you a proof. Isn't this, when he was more active, isn't this the formula of Bernie Sanders' success? Mm-hmm. He was talking this economic language very concretely, and it's incredible what wide resonance he found. My son, younger one, who followed this closely, debate 4 years ago and so on, said that how big TV stations downplayed him, like often when he was on the show, it got much more viewers, but they tried to sidetrack him, to put him aside. It's not so. I totally agree with you. It's not that Trumpian jokes work, and then who wants to listen to these boring boring numbers and so on. No, I agree with you. Bernie did it in a way. For me, if you ask me for one scene, image even, which defines the last years, was, you remember, Trump inauguration, Bernie sitting alone there in a corner.
Yes, I should say.
This became the iconic image, overshadowing all those stupid poetry and songs or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I should say I really loved from the introduction to your book. At the end of the introduction, you say, "What then is to be done? Lenin's demand for concrete analysis, the concrete situation, is today more actual than ever. No simple universal formula can provide the answer. There are moments in which pragmatic support for modest progressive measures is needed. There are moments when a radical confrontation is the only way. And there are moments when a sobering silence and a cute pair of mittens speak more than 1,000 words." So.
Yeah, but it's really a concrete situation. This is why I agree with you. I'm not dismissing in the direction of like what some radical leftists are doing AOC. Basically, her judgment was the right one without naivety. We know, and now it's becoming clear how Biden will not be able to do it. But this was a mega pedagogical experience. We had to go through it. It would have been a catastrophe to say at the beginning, no, Biden will fail, let's just oppose him, and so on and so on. Because, these failures are never pure, simple failures. Failures leave traces. Here I disagreed years ago with Badiou when there was Occupy Wall Street. He said, just they were the true 1%, just a couple of relatively rich, educated sons. But I agree here, with Chomsky, who said, yeah, they failed. It dissipated, disappeared. But it left a trace, somewhere in, I will not use this obscurantist term, public unconscious, but there is a kind of a deep working public political memory. All this remains.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.